It's actually working. Can anybody see me? Oh, someone's coming. Oh!
I can see you.
Okay, wait. This isn't. It won't switch my camera. Let me exit and come back in.
Hello.
There we go. Look at that blur back there. Look at that. Look at that bokeh. Nice and blurry.
The question is, am I blurry?
Oh, I have an avatar finally. Amazing. I finally figured out how to make Livestorm work. I feel proud.
Check it out. Just came.
Ooh, is that the wait? Which one is that?
So I had the mini. This is the mini 2.
Ooh, nice.
This does 4K now, and it has a new transmitter. So like the remote's a lot bigger than the old one, but the transmission distance is supposed to be way better.
Where does the iPhone mount, like above it?
Yeah, I think this thing this pops up.
Ooh, that's way nicer than the old one. That old one's really
a
little challenging to make work. Yeah.
What is that thing?
This is the DJI. Yeah, the DJI Mini 2. So
does it fly in the air?
It does.
Is that what we're talking about? That did look like a thing that flew in the air.
It wouldn't be a very good drone if it didn't fly in the air.
So there's all these rules coming up from the FAA.
Oh, that's the remote.
That's the controller.
Got it.
Yeah, there's these rules coming up. These rules from the FAA coming up where you're going to have to like register your drone, and the drone itself has to report its location, which means the drone needs like cell service, and you have to pay for a subscription for that, and you got to pay for this FAA thing, unless your drone is under 250 grams. So they created this one, the Mini, which is 249 grams. So it's like one of the popular ones that you won't have to register with the FAA, but all the rest of them you will, and be tracked everywhere you go for all time.
Wow, that is impressive. Hey Peter, if you're out there, you should be able to just hop on the stage. Let me see if I can find you.
This is the old controller.
Peter yet?
Yeah, and then the wings, little wings on the bottom pop up.
Yeah,
right?
these open, and it's super super weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna try. And the controller has like a really nice like weight to it too. It's not. It feels like dense.
Oh,
it feels good.
This one's pretty dense too.
Whee!
Oh, here's
the better.
Here's the mini. Here's the mini. The Mavic.
I had the mini one.
Air. Oh, the Air. Sorry.
Yeah,
this is the Air.
That's the Air. Yeah.
Which also is under. I think this also is under the limit.
Well, is it the old? Because there was a 500 gram limit or something for a while, but I think it's 250 now, isn't it?
I don't know. Is it?
Let me.
Not sure. All right. Where's Peter?
No, where is Peter? You all ready to get some nostalgia on?
We got some stories to tell.
We got stories. We got the feelings to feel, Rob.
Here comes the feelings.
Here comes. It's feeling time. Where's the theme song for feeling time? Peter is rebooting his router.
Yeah, oh. Peter is, I think, currently in like the back country of South Africa.
His tubes are normally. It says his tubes are bad right now. All right, well, what shall we stall?
We should now. Well, we should start talking, or people are going to leave because people aren't here to hear about drones. I mean, drones are cool.
People, what song and dance would you like Tom to do while we wait? A jig. All right, we do have some things. Some things are happening. Some community things. Well, okay, docs. Dom wanted us to mention some docs that are up. There is a pretty sweet, if I dare say, you can say sweet, about a GraphQL doc that we put out. So that's a good one. Check that one out. Did we get the test doc? Did the test doc happen, Rob? Rob wrote the how to test all your things documentation to beat when, like, it's the Bible of the testing. It's a lot of words, right, Rob?
Yeah, and Dom proofread it for me and found 4,000 typos, so I have to go through and merge those all in.
Because that's what Dom does.
Yeah, thank you, Dom. Thank you, Dom.
He's good with the words. Oh, we don't have Peter yet.
Here's a little preview of what's to come. Try to guess how this book relates to
Ooh.
Redwood?
Ooh.
Tom will
That is a
remember.
good question. I love that. That book is amazing. I listened to it on audio tape. You got to get that on audio tape because Neil Gaiman narrates it himself, and he has the most soothing British voice, and it's like it's just perfect. It's not even, well, soothing is maybe the wrong word, but it fits the material of that book perfectly, and the stories. His version of those North myths is just, I love it. They're amazing.
Yeah.
So good. That
But
was
it's written as like
Norse mythology by Neil Gaiman.
What do they call it? It's like I forget the name. It's like historical fiction, not historical fiction, but it's like history. It's history, but it's written as like a modern story would be. It's not like reading like the Bible. It's like very like dry, repetitive. It's just like a story, but it involves all these old Norse gods and how they all related together, but as like a novel, right? Kind of.
Yeah, it's written, if you've read any Neil Gaiman, it's written in Neil Gaiman style. It's just the stories of Norse mythology. As he said, I think in the introduction or something, he says he went and he read like a million different versions of the Norse myths, and then kind of fused the ideas that he liked best from the different tellings into his own sort of version of what they were. And it just becomes another telling of those same myths, as all myths are just retellings of ideas that people share over time. And his version is just, I don't know, I find them very, they're very accessible. Because they're told in a modern way, and they're great. And if you listen to him tell you those stories, then they're even better. Nice. And this is relevant to the history of Redwood.
Ooh.
All right. Okay. So let's, Peter will join us as soon as he can. Oh man, technical difficulties. What a bummer. Always a spoiler. So, all right, Tom,
Yes.
Go ahead and open up. We're not going to start here, but I just sent a link in the chat so everyone else could get to it with the first commit to the Redwood.js/Redwood repo, which wasn't Redwood.js/Redwood at the time. And it was a README, because README driven development that Tom wrote. And this was a commit that was done on June 9th, 2019. So here is what's happening today. Today is the 1-year anniversary birthday for Redwood version 0.1 being released. And oh, wow, is it a year? We snuck this thing in like right at the buzzer because of the same day. I didn't know it was the same day. I'd forgotten because last year is just all like gone in my mind. It was the same day that the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic, right? So we got Redwood in and then global pandemic came. Those things are not related, but one did not, no causality implied. But wow, it's been a year. So there's a lot of things to talk about. And on Redwood's birthday, we wanted to spend some time telling some stories, honoring this amazing community and group of people that have gathered around Redwood. And wow, a lot of things had happened. So the document that I just sent to Tom was the first commit to Redwood. But Tom, where I wanted to start is there were things leading up to this. So this was June 9th, 2019. Where were you? And what are the things that happened? Like something must have inspired you to say, okay, I'm going to make that commit. Like I've been thinking about it for a while and now I'm ready. I'm going to put it all on digital paper and create the repo. But what were the events and where were you leading up to that?
Yeah, I think the oldest that I can recall, because I don't really keep a journal. Yes, Rob, we see it. Thank you. The oldest thing was when Netlify came out with their support for functions, where you could just write a function and put it in your repository, and then Netlify would pick that up and they would take the code in your repository and they would spin up the AWS Lambda for you, and then you could call that from your Jamstacky website with JavaScript or whatever you wanted to do. And that I thought was super amazing and made me start thinking about how to use that for full stack web apps. And at the time, there wasn't a lot more than that to the idea, but I kept telling Matt and Chris, the founders of Netlify, that I was going to write a blog post because I owed them a blog post since forever. I was always like, yes, I'll blog about Netlify because I've been involved and invested since the early days in Netlify, since the very first seed round. And I always owed them a blog post. They're like, Tom, write a damn blog post for us. And I was like, I want to wait until I can write a really good blog post about something technical. And so this was going to be my thing that I was going to write a blog post about was, all right, I'm going to build a website using functions to create a full stack web application. But I never ended up having time to really do that. But the idea started there. And then that gets into this repository that Rob put in here called Der Spielplatz. So I've also been spending a lot of time in Germany because I'm running a startup called Chatterbug that is based in Berlin.
Which was happening at this time, because I think that's another important part of the story. Like you're actually, so GitHub, you were not at GitHub anymore. I don't think GitHub had been acquired yet, but you were still doing, like you were still busy in building, and at Chatterbug, you had co-founded Chatterbug and was working on that. So which you started with a Rails stack with Chatterbug, right?
Yeah, well, it still is Rails on the back end, but it has become mostly just a GraphQL API. So it is Rails, but it doesn't use almost any of the Rails rendering stuff anymore. It is just serving GraphQL. And Ruby is you can do a decent GraphQL API with Ruby and the GraphQL library that you can then build on top of Rails. It actually works pretty well. It's pretty nice.
Okay, so but that's all, again, that was all background, right? That was context when you're doing these things. I actually remember you, like the first time, right when Chatterbug was started, and I asked if you were going to use React, or we were talking about React, you're like, I don't know, like you guys in your React, like
we didn't
Rails. Like
I didn't know
nobody
React.
needs React.
I had probably tried to learn React 2 or 3 times at that point and failed every time because the documentation was just abysmally bad back then. And I was like, I don't understand this at all. I don't understand React. I'm obviously not smart enough to understand React. Like these people, like they're next level. They know how this stuff works, but I couldn't figure it out. I tried, trust me, I tried several times. This was back when it was like Redux was, there was like some state management, like it was just inscrutable. I don't know if you ever read the documentation like 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, but man, it was really, really, really difficult to understand. For me, at least.
I didn't try.
So
that's all going on, right? These are the things you're doing while you're thinking about, can I spin something up and use functions?
Right. Yeah. So I had that, and then we started using. We did start using React, and I finally learned React, and the documentation was finally good enough for me to actually learn React. And we started using that for all the new stuff at Chatterbug. And then we started using, we started piecing it together. It became the rendering layer instead of the Rails rendering stuff. And it was nice. Like I loved working with React, the one-way data flow, the breaking it into components, all that stuff started to make a ton of sense, and I really liked it. But then as we kept going, we started wondering, like, why is it so hard to figure things out? Why is it hard to choose technology solutions for the various things? And how are we even supposed to organize things on disk? Like, where do things go? There are like no best practices. I would always type like file layout of React app best practices, and it would be like 0 results. I was like, how has nobody like talked about this stuff before? Everyone does it differently. Every React app is wildly different. The only thing that's common between them is React itself. And then all of the other components are different. People start with create React app, which is a very light thing to start with, and then start layering things on top. And the amount of time that we would spend getting tests running, and it would be like, okay, now we want to use Jest to do testing. It would be like a month of trying to make it work the way that we wanted. And so it's just all of this overhead to get a React-based application working. And so this was also going on at the same time. That in the back of my head, I was like, I want to build something that uses Netlify's functions to build a full stack app. Meanwhile, we're actually building a full stack thing with React for Chatterbug using a GraphQL, not even using GraphQL at that point. It was you basically get a big JSON object out of Rails, and then that would just give it to the top level React component, and then it would just render a bunch of stuff. Or we would have multiple React mount points on the page. So we would start rendering. It was a hybrid thing. It was like part of it was using Rails's rendering stuff, and part of it was using React. But it just felt too complicated. It's like, I just want to write a React app, and I want to use GraphQL because then I can have components be responsible for their own fetching. And we started making things work that way a little bit in Chatterbug, where then specific components would pull GraphQL. Like some components would get their data from Rails server side, and they would just be on the page as JSON, and the React would grab them and render. Other things would actually do GraphQL calls asynchronously and populate. And so we had this weird hybrid thing going on, and it felt really messy. So anyway, all of that is happening. And then at some point, I'm like,
unless people think you're insane, there weren't a lot of options. It's not like you could say, oh, you know what, I'll use Vue or I'll use Felt. Like they weren't mature. Like to get the kind of end user experience that was dynamic and modern, this was kind of best in class at the time, right? Like, or maybe you're just crazy and love pain. I don't know.
There was no comprehensive solution at all. Like there were no frameworks. I mean, Next was probably the closest thing, but a few years ago, Next was not nearly as good as it is now. And Next can do a lot now that it couldn't do at all before. So that didn't really feel like a solution. And Next itself is still not a full stack framework. Doesn't make any choices about databases and things. And other frameworks are starting to fill in those gaps, but none of this stuff existed 3 years ago. And so that was the thing. And David, you and I used to meet up at the pizza place in San Francisco, and I would wax on about how I wanted to build this idea, but I didn't know exactly what that meant, because also I was not a JavaScript expert. I am still not a JavaScript or TypeScript expert, and so I needed other people to help me. And this is probably about when I started talking to Peter, because Peter was our JavaScript expert at Chatterbug. He knew this stuff way, way, way better than I did.
This is where we'll splice in Peter later. Right? We'll come back in the recording and we're like, Peter, where were you when Tom started talking? Anyway,
yeah. So we would just hang out.
He is in the rural South Africa right now, and I think he's driving to another spot so we can jump in. So we'll get some conversations from him soon. But yeah. So anyway, please keep going. So Peter's a Chatterbug. He's a JavaScript expert.
Right.
And then you're having these conversations with Matt and Chris as well about what's happening on the infrastructure side.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to build with them. And so I think I bring these ideas up to Peter, and I'm like, we should have a framework that does all this stuff for us and just codify all of these decisions, because we finally got our React app into a place. We were using styled components, and we had made a bunch of other choices around how to do things and how to lay things out on the file system. And we used the directory named Webpack plugin, I think, so that we wouldn't have to, so we could just reference, the files that we include by one name instead of having to duplicate in and have an index file and all this. We just had a bunch of nice kind of things we'd put together, and we were like, we should build this into a framework so that nobody has to do this stuff over and over and over. And indeed our future selves, and also use GraphQL and make that really nice. And then also use JavaScript on the back end, so that we don't have to use Ruby on the back end and then JavaScript on the front end. Let's just make it all JavaScript. And so then we started to figure out how do we do that? How do we do the GraphQL? How does one deploy the GraphQL? Because Lambda functions have some severe limitations. So we took we'd get together after work when I'd be in Berlin for the week, and we'd go out and grab dinner and just talk over what even does this stuff mean? And I remember having no idea how this stuff would actually work, and a lot of complexities. And then we'd come up with ideas and be like, maybe that'll work. And then we would both go back and just code. And because I was super jet lagged going to Europe from here, it means that you can stay up really, really late with ease. And so I'd stay up until 2 a.m, prototyping the router or something. And it was fun. I like this phase of coding is my favorite, where you're just experimenting. What could it work? Could this even work at all? The way that we're thinking, how do you stuff the whole GraphQL API into a Lambda, and can you make that work, and can you make it perform? And how do you do authentication, and how do you do routing, and how do you do any of this stuff? How do you split up the business logic on the back end? There's a million choices to be made, and I love that phase of development where it's half design of what the interface would be like, and half implementation. But so this is getting a little. So this is now. So this repository, der Spielplatz.
Yeah. Why don't you? And Rob, I want to know where you are when this is being written, because I know that Tom's having conversations with you as well. And if you haven't picked up, if you're watching this right now, we've just been friends for a long time. There's Rob and Tom, you all could talk about when you met, but right, decades ago. And Tom and I met because we were neighbors and family friends in San Francisco. And so these are just conversations that are happening, which is kind of fun. And I think also there's all these, just the other story you could tell about how do things get made. And back when people used to hang out and have meals together and just talk about stuff they're excited about, right? That's this other things happening. But Tom, why don't you take some time? I would love for you to read through the README back from June 2019.
Okay. Well, let me because I think der Spielplatz precedes that first README. So der Spielplatz.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So I was like, I need to build something. So this is both to satisfy the Netlify blog post promise that I'd made, and to try to work with Peter to build something that would be this like framework. We're like, we can't just build a framework. We need to build something with the framework and then extract the framework out of it. And so we started building der Spielplatz. Der Spielplatz means playground in German. And so my idea of an app that I wanted to build was like Yelp for playgrounds, because I have children, small children, and we used to travel a lot when, you could travel. And finding good playgrounds was always really hard. So I was like, what if there was just a catalog of like every playground, and like, does it have good bathrooms, and what equipment is available, and how big is it, and is it safe, and all these things, and tons of pictures of it. That would be super cool. I'd go to a new place and I'd just open the app and I'd be like, all right, where are the playgrounds close to me? And be like, boop, 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 boop. And I could click on them and be like, sweet, that's where we're going. And that would be amazing. So I wanted to build that. That was going to be a good idea for me. So we came up with a name, just call it der Spielplatz, because I've been learning German.
And also sounds much cooler in German than the playground.
Exactly. And so we started just building that kind of, but it ended up being more working on the framework itself, just to get like some pages working and what would it work like. We never actually built anything that looked like that application. So don't go there thinking that that's an implementation of what I just described, because it's not at all. But that's why it's called der Spielplatz. And also it was funny because it's like the playground for these framework ideas.
Meta. Oh, there it is.
Naming is important. So then I think we start to develop this thing, and I'm like, all right, this thing seems like we could build something real out of this. So I need to write up something aspirational about what this framework needs to be. So this is where Rob comes in. So I get on an airplane to go to Maine.
But wait, even before that, wasn't there the original name?
What was it? I don't even remember. Oh, Chainsaw. So the original name was Chainsaw. Because I was like, what's like a cool power tool, Chainsaw. A chainsaw is a good power tool. So I was going to call it Chainsaw. But there was something already called Chainsaw. So I needed a new name. So then I came up with a new name, which was Hammer, which I really liked, because and you can see this in the README now, why it's called Hammer, because I was reading that book right there, with probably my favorite illustration on the cover ever, like that hammer. Like that is what Mjolnir, which is the name of Thor's hammer. That's what that should be called. And there's a story in that book of how Thor gets the hammer, and it's a really entertaining story. Peter,
Peter,
from his car.
Are you safe? Are you okay?
I feel like this is a little bit Blair Witch Project, but I'm okay. My internet was having problems, so I drove to my sister-in-law's farm down the road, and it's a little bit more stable. It's actually date night, and we're looking after their kids. So I'm sitting outside their house like a weird creep, but they're at the farm, so there's no one around, so it's okay.
It comes up. What is it? The Tokoloshi? The Tokoloshi is going to pop up in that window back there.
Watch out for that.
We've only said good things about you so far, but this is good. We're leading up to the part in the story where Tom creates the first README. Where were you We were kind of doing a where were you in the world at that time, but right when
Der Spielplatz.
Wow, did I just destroy that thing? So the playground was created.
I know an app where you could learn German if you're interested.
Oh, can I get a discount?
No.
Peter, where were you when all this was happening? We're talking June 2019, back when you could hang out with people.
It was summertime in Berlin, which is always amazing. And I was working for Chatterbug, the company that Tom co-founded, the one that he was talking about, where you can learn German. And I guess I was, oh geez. Am I still here?
Yeah,
You're good.
Okay. I guess I was probably lying in bed with my laptop like this. I'm 100% sure that's what it was like.
Yeah, so I've told kind of some of the story leading up to this and how we used to meet in Berlin and talk about these ideas. And then we started working on the Der Spielplatz repository to sort of flesh out some of these ideas and see if there's anything there. And then I decided I needed to write an aspirational README. The original name was Chainsaw. I don't think anything was ever named Oh, now he's gone.
No.
I don't think anything was the only thing
Tokeloshi
that
got
I
him.
ever the only thing I ever actually named Chainsaw was some database in AWS somewhere where I was going to connect that to something. I think that's the only thing that I ever actually named Chainsaw. So I realized but Chainsaw is already used. I was like, oh, I should probably look on NPM to see if the names that I choose are taken before they're chosen, which is funny because then I chose to call it Hammer because the Norse mythology book, and I was like, hammer, like, look at that hammer. That is the coolest hammer of all time, right? Like, I want that. I want to commission someone to make that hammer, and I'll put it on my shelf.
Ooh.
So if you know anyone that does intricate metal work like that, I need to know about them because I'm going to pay them to do that. And so,
Peter,
but
are
also,
you safe? Are you okay, Peter?
In
The
and
joke
out.
will get old.
Sorry about this.
You're fine. Jump in when you can. Go ahead, Tom.
So that's number one reason why it's called Hammer. So I was trying to come up with a name, and I was like, I'm listening to this book about hammers. And number two reason is that in German, Hammer is slang for awesome. So if you see something is Hammer, something is Hammer, das ist Hammer. That means that thing is awesome. So I thought that was pretty cool. So then I was like, all right, well, clearly it should be called Hammer. And so I called it Hammer. I did look on NPM, and there was something called Hammer.js, which is a fairly popular like touch library for mobile devices. But I was like, I'm going to call mine the Hammer framework, and there will be no confusion. At least that's what I told myself, because I really wanted to call it Hammer. So it was going to be hard to convince me to not call it Hammer at that point, because if you look at that README, it's really like, why is it called Hammer? Thor's hammer is called Mjolnir and has properties that I thought would be aspirational for my nascent web app framework. Namely, Mjolnir, which is the name of the hammer, is unbreakable. Wouldn't it be nice if your web app had this property? When thrown, it will never miss its target. Again, you'd be in good shape if your web application always hit the mark. No matter how far it's thrown, it will always return. Quite appropriate for a client-server model, don't you think? Robust enough for every request to generate a response. And you can grow or shrink Mjolnir as needed. As mentioned in the philosophy section, I wanted my framework to be a pleasure for both large and small projects alike, just like Thor's hammer. This also works when talking about the auto-scaling features that serverless Jamstack enables. Double whammy. So I was really into the name and came up with that section. If you go and look at the current README, you'll see that there's a similar section about why it is called Redwood. And it's all a lie, because it really was just, I had to come up with a new version of that section that was like the same, but for Redwood. And I think
no matter how far
it worked out.
No matter how far you throw a redwood branch, it always returns to your hand.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right.
Pine cone. However far you throw a pine cone.
So you mentioned the plane flight.
Right. So I wrote this on an airplane because I was like, what else am I going to do on an airplane? I was like, all right, I finally got a couple hours. I can focus on this. I'm just going to bang this thing out and write this README. And and then I'm going to share it. I'm going to send it to Rob because I'd known Rob for forever, and I thought he would be a good judge of whether this was interesting or not.
Yeah.
And
so
why was I on an airplane?
Yeah. So Tom and I went to woodworking fantasy camp. There's a company, there's a company in Maine called Thomas Moser, and they make furniture, like handmade furniture. And they have a program where you can go and spend a week there and actually build a piece of furniture with their craftspeople. They call it the, what do they call it? The customer in residence.
Yeah.
Customer in residence. Yeah. So Tom and I did that. And as he's flying to Maine, I got there like 2 or 3 hours early. So I'm just waiting in the airport for Tom. And he's like texting me. He's like, hey, check this out. So he's writing the README and sending it to me on GitHub. And I'm like writing it and or reviewing it and leaving comments and stuff like that. So then by the time he landed, the README was basically done. I think the majority of it was, right? I don't know how many. If you
I just sat down and just wrote it straight as you see it, mostly.
And that was the first commit to that repo, right?
That was the README. That was where we were going to start. And then it was like, all right, now we'll actually, this is where the actual framework is going to live. We're going to extract that out of their Spielplatz.
Okay, so I just posted the components that you had listed at that time, right? The description of what it's going to, so kind of the vision, and then everything was going to be in there. Like, tell me about this. Tell me about this list.
Yeah, well,
June
this is
2019.
Peter could probably tell you more about this list. Like this is really the stack that we were using mostly, aside from GraphQL, even though we were using some GraphQL at Chatterbug. So maybe you are the reason that most of these things are on this list, Peter, really.
I think it's super interesting to see the old names like Prisma Photon and Docs and Reach Router. Like we were like, these were the parts that it should be. This is really what we were using at Chatterbug that we liked. And Chatterbug was sort of the test bed for a lot of the things that went into Redwood. And we figured out a way of building components that we really enjoyed, or building front-end stuff that we enjoyed. And we just took that stuff and put it into a framework.
So
except for Docs, we didn't end up using that.
Docs.
It was better, but it was better at the time. It could do things that Storybook couldn't do, but then Storybook was like, oh crap. And then they then went and redid their whole thing basically to make it a lot more awesome.
I feel like Storybook is actually really good at that. Like they'll be like, we're slow, our product is really slow, and then all of a sudden they're like, we're gonna be fast, we're gonna be super fast, and you can plug in any boulder you want and we'll be the fastest thing ever. So it's maybe a good strategy for survival.
So Peter, do you know, I was watching the repo. I saw this document when Tom created it as well. I would have been in San Francisco at the time. Peter, we would have never met. Tom told me about you. And then somewhere in that fall, I saw like commits just started taking off, right? So the playground was chipping away. There were some things that were happening. You could kind of see what was going on. I remember like looking at this list and spending some time in each of the tools, right? So I didn't know Docs very well. So I remember doing that. You could play around with each of the tools, but what would have happened in the fall of 2019 that just started accelerating progress? And maybe it was just time, but was there anything else that like the pieces came together and you could start building a thing?
So I think the impetus was Tom, really. He came to me and he said, we kind of like started on their Spielplatz, and then we were building on it for a while, and then it just kind of died down. And then Tom was like, hey, I'm actually thinking of hiring someone to build this. And I was like, don't do that. I want to build this. And then I just started really hammering at it.
I see what you did there.
Instead. Yeah, so really it was the pressure of wanting to see this thing in the world and realizing that I think I dropped the ball, and I had an opportunity to pick it up again and run with it. So that's what I did. And I think a lot of different things were happening at the company that I was working at Chatterbug. I was starting to become more of a manager rather than someone that wrote a lot of code. So I had an outlet in Redwood that was, I could actually just produce a lot of code instead of reading PRs and managing people, which was a nice distraction in my evenings. So
and produce a lot of code, you did. A lot of code. And then somewhere in that fall, Rob, you wrote a tutorial, or the first draft of it. And I remember I received the first draft of the tutorial. Tom sent it along, was like, hey, working on this tutorial. Like, what do you think? Try it out. And I started going through the tutorial and I was trying everything. And I hadn't met you yet, Rob, but I was trying things out and going like, hey, this is broken. Like, hey, what do I do? Like, no, it's just, that's the point. These things, which was weird to me. Like, why would you write a tutorial if it didn't actually work yet? Little did I know.
Yeah,
so when did that start?
The tutorial was driving that development. So going back to the woodworking fantasy camp, of course, at night, Tom and I, we get dinner and we talk, and the sale of GitHub enabled Tom and his wife to help out a lot of other people. He has a company, Preston Warner Ventures, where they donate a ton of money to other deserving groups around the world, and he did some angel investing stuff as well. And as part of that, he was saying, he had an idea for this project. He called it like hypothesis. He just thinks it's cool things that he thinks should like exist in the world. So he wanted like a book to like teach you quantum mechanics without having to have a doctorate in quantum mechanics. Like from high school algebra, how do you calculate quantum mechanic equations, kind of stuff. He wants that book to exist. Or he was talking about like a VR game, like a space racing VR game would be cool. But he was realizing like he doesn't have any time to do any of this. He would eventually need to get somebody to do it. So we talked about that, and I'm like, yeah, that'd be cool. That'd be awesome. I mean, of course, we talked about Redwood. And then like a month or two later, him and his wife were like, hey, can you get on a Zoom call? And I'm like, oh boy. And as soon as anyone's like, we need to talk, you get that feeling in your chest. You're like, oh no.
What did I do?
You're in trouble.
What did I do at fantasy woodworking camp? Like, what happens at fantasy woodworking camp stays at fantasy woodworking camp, Tom.
There was some comedian who said that's like the 4 worst words in the English language. We need to talk. But I joined the call and they said, hey, we think we're ready to like make Hypothesis real. Do you want to come and work for the foundation, Preston Warner Ventures? And I'd be and we kind of, I think the title kind of got inspired from Thomas Moser, the customer in residence. So technically I'm the developer in residence at Preston Warner Ventures. So I work for Tom. But as part of that, I get to work on Redwood as well. So he was like, hey, let's do, we got the README, but we need to teach people how to use this, and we need to drive the development of the framework itself. So what if we write a tutorial that's just like pie in the sky, like whatever you think would be like the coolest way, the easiest way to build a web app, write that in the tutorial, and then we'll see if we can figure out how to actually make the code work that way. So it's a very interesting way to do it backwards. And at the time I was 100% Ruby on Rails. So a lot of the Ruby on Rails stuff that I just felt really comfortable with. And Ruby was famous, or Rails was famous in the community for like these scaffold generators. And there was the famous build a blog in I think 15 minutes. That was one of the first famous Rails videos where the DHH, the founder of Rails, built a whole blog from scratch in 15 minutes. So we kind of wanted to get that same sort of experience in our tutorial. So a lot of tutorial stuff with building scaffolds, like that was all inspired by Rails. So that's how I came in and started writing that. And yeah, I think David saw it when it was like ultra first draft, and he's like, "This doesn't work. This doesn't work." And I'm like, "No, it's not supposed to work yet."
Yeah, I think I asked David to review it. I was like, "Read this and don't do it. Just read it."
I wanted to do it.
And then he tried to go do it, and obviously that didn't work out. But I think Rob, you coming in was really important because Peter and I had already been bludgeoned by the complexity of JavaScript enough to not even see some of the complexities that we were dealing with. And you came in totally fresh. And we'd be like, all right, so all you have to do is have this file, and this file, and this file, and then you do this and this and this, and then it works. And you're like, what's wrong with you? Right. And you came in with beginner's mind, and you saw all of the ridiculous complexity, and you were like, can't do that. And so then we would sit down and be like, all right, that's okay, fair point. That is really dumb to have to do. And then Peter mostly would go back and be like, all right, what are the technical machinations that you have to do in order to not have to do all of that boilerplate crap that you don't want to do coming from Ruby?
Yeah, like we had GraphQL Nexus, Prisma Nexus. I forget who actually owned that one. But that was one of those examples where it's a whole separate layer in the middle where you're defining like your schema sort of again, but in code. So instead of like the nice GraphQL STL we have now, where it's like a DSL language, you just indent and you're done, You had to actually like call function, and this is null, and this is required, and this isn't required, and you had to like chain all these function calls together. I'm like, this is so complicated. You really have to do this for GraphQL? And I didn't at the time. I was kind of new to GraphQL, so I was blaming all this on GraphQL. I'm like, this sucks. But it wasn't GraphQL. It was just one particular implementation of how someone decided to do that, and luckily we sort of moved away from that.
And one of my favorite expressions of Rob is when he's like, "Oh man, why are we doing this?"
That was the sign. That was the sign, right? Like the threshold had been crossed, and the pain. We all were a little bit, too accustomed to the pain. Actually, I was not a part of these decisions at this time, right? But I do know that pain threshold, and you're like, I'll just get through. It's me. It's not the technology. It's me. And Rob was like, nah, it's technology. This stack.
It's like
who would use JavaScript?
It's like how many times I would go, oh man, come on. Then they knew that was like really bad. We're
like, oh, here we go.
But it's when you're new, and for anyone else who's watching this, like when you're new to that, man, it just makes you feel like kind of dumb, and you take it all on yourself. Like, why can't I figure this out? But I don't think it's really our fault. It's just like so much stuff, and it's so complicated. That's a big part of Redwood. Is sort of get all that configuration done and out of the way. You don't even have to think about it, and you can just kind of focus on the fun part of actually building it.
Yeah, like Webpack.
Is Amanda. Yeah, man.
And so this process that the three of you are going through at this time, this is where the conventions around the file system and structuring that's where it unfolded. And this is where the idea of services, and you had some real infrastructure requirements, like some constraints if you wanted to use Netlify functions. But then Tom, you had some real experience with I'd call it a large Rails project.
Large-ish.
Right? Large-ish. Maybe the largest.
Possibly at one point it was. I don't think it is anymore, but it's definitely, I mean, GitHub is a massive code base.
But you knew the downsides to the wrong early choices, or maybe said in a positive way, you knew the opportunities for creating a golden path in building something and what that could mean for long-term iteration, long-term maintainability, being able to scale your organization, your people, your team, your engineers, as well as the product itself for the end. So you brought that mindset into it. And somewhere in here, Cells was created, which is, so I just talked about Cells. I don't know how I ended up at the State of React ecosystem conversation an hour and a half ago, but there I was talking about Redwood, and I'm like, yeah, we think about React, but like we don't have this pain that you all are talking about with React anymore. But because I talked about Cells a lot, where did Cells come into it? Like as a part of the process you're describing, the concept of Cells arrived, which if you're new to Redwood is a higher order component that it does your declarative data fetching is there, your query is there, all these other components that are your state. So you get to do all these things that would take a lot of work with a lot of components inside of one component. It's called a cell in Redwood. And where did that come about? Because that's an innovation as far as a pattern in this landscape, correct?
Yeah, I don't think anyone else had extracted that into a pattern quite such, and we had a hell of a time coming up with a name for it. We went through all kinds of different ideas for what it could be called. At one point, we were going to have TX and RX. We were going to call them, in communications, TX is short for transmitting and RX is short for receiving. So a cell was going to be an RX where it would receive data from the server, and a TX would be the mutations where you would call the server. But that didn't really make sense because you would also put your mutations in the same file as your cell. I think cell was probably the first name that we had for it. Did we ever call them anything other than cells? I think that was the first name that we called them. And then we were like, what the hell is a cell? Like nobody knows what a cell is.
Well, do you remember where that came from? Anything. Put it in there. That was
right.
Was Rails.
Right. So that was a Rails thing. Yeah, that's right.
And it's I think different than what we do, but it was the concept of like encapsulating certain chunks of the view in a thing called a cell. And that's kind of where we got that name from.
Right. Yeah.
Framework.
Yeah. So there was the concept of like, this kind of wrapped up thing that would do something for you. So we called them cells because we didn't have a better name. And then we never ever came up with a better name. we had all kinds of things that we considered. I don't even remember what the things we considered are anymore. But yeah, like that's the like. I honestly don't even remember where those came from. I think it was just that it's annoying to do. Like putting all of that into your component it sucks. Like, and so extracting out your data fetching from your component can really simplify them. It was just iterating over probably the tutorial mostly, where it's like, how do we explain this to people? How do we write a tutorial that makes all of this seem simple? And when all that stuff is packaged up together, the data fetching and the rendering into one thing, it's like you're mixing these two different concerns that really are unrelated. You have data fetching and then you have rendering, and the data fetching thing is its own bit. And if you could abstract that in a way and make it declarative, I think we just got there naturally. Do either of you remember more clearly the evolution of that?
Yeah, it was sort of like we first had this query component that came from Apollo, and we actually just used that. And I think then we were looking at how much branching there was in that, like loading, error, and I think Storybook had come out with a similar pattern where you export things, and those exports had to be named in a certain way, and then it would influence how the interface ones came out. And it was just iterative, and eventually it just snapped, and we were like, what if you export success? Or we probably called it something much different than success, loading, query, etc. We were once the idea had snapped into place, then we started naming these things. But it was really quite an intense iterative approach to coming up with those.
Yeah, I remember trying to fight for like having the empty state. Again, the guys who made Rails, the company 37 Signals, they had a whole book about this once, where it was like everyone kind of forgets about the blank slate. Like when you first get to something and there's no data there, nobody really cares about that. They assume there's always data. So I kind of like the idea of having like that blank slate empty thing being like a first-class citizen. So to get people to think about it, because most people when they first go there, there's not going to be any data. So you can show them a nice friendly message.
Okay, so March 11th, 2020. Oh, I didn't want that link there.
Oh no, we
anyway,
got before that still.
There's still some more things.
Yeah, check this out.
Well, I was looking. We've got about 30 minutes left, so I was looking at our time too. But yeah,
well, let me go real quick.
Yeah.
So we went down a. We decided we wanted to worry about branding Hammer. So we did some branding stuff, and I found this, by the way, Tom.
Ooh,
I found that.
that's
There's
cool.
that chainsaw. There's that chainsaw database.
Oh,
So I still have that. I still have a
There
link
it
to
is.
that in my database lookup table stuff. Yeah, so I started with this and then Tom talked about the idea of the Thor's hammer, so we kind of started from there. And it's kind of a circle. I think we were thinking stickers at this point. So I started like playing with this, and I went down here and did some stuff and put some text in there. And then at some point, Tom's like, I really like that hammer on the cover of that book. So then I got super fancy. I like this really neat like intricate design, and I'm putting different text in here. And at some point, I show this to Tom, and he's like, "No, that's not what I was thinking." So we went. So I kind of got away from the fanciness, and he was like, "What about just like a regular plain old hammer?" So I like found some stock photos of hammers and played with some different text and had stuff in here. And we got down in here, and then eventually it kind of like died off. And then at some point we decided to like rebrand and rename, and that's kind of when we went down the Redwood branch. But there's still like vestigial evidence of this. If I go to here, so if you've ever seen the Hammer example blog, it's like one of the first apps we built.
There it is.
An example app. So
there it is.
Still, and this was when it was still called Hammer. I started building the site, and we switched over, but then we left this as Hammer. So yeah.
That was good. I hadn't seen all those. I saw Peter's logo that he tweeted about today, which was
it's funny because
pretty amazing.
I shared that with Tom and Rob, and I was like, hey, yeah, I came up with this idea, and it was like complete crickets. There was no.
That's not true.
I was like, cool. I guess
it's supposed to be a hand, right? It was supposed to be a hand on the hammer. That was the M.
Oh yeah. Do you have that? That logo is amazing.
I tweeted it this morning. I don't think my bandwidth would be suitable enough for me to share it.
Yeah,
but what someone pointed out to me, today, they said that the hand has 6 fingers, and I was like, oh damn, oh yeah, it was Oliver. I was like, oh, geez, that's true.
Math. Who needs it? Counting. That's amazing.
I mean, it is amazing. I mean, it is amazing. The problem is the problem is that it's too amazing. Really.
Yeah, I see that. I see
illustration.
That. Too amazing.
So first of all, hammers are hard to make into squares, which is you need something that can be a squarish format for a logo, because otherwise, to always have one that's really long and rectangular is a problem. In certain instances where you have a fixed width, then your logo ends up being like super microscopically tall, which is bad for branding in general. That's why I was trying to get Rob to do one that was more square, but it turns out hammers are really bad at being square. There's just not a square object at all, and they really can't be by their very nature. And so that was a problem. Also, then at this point, so I'll talk about why we renamed it, and then we can move on to the next thing. But so problem number one, Hammer was like picking up some steam. A few people we hadn't done anything public to launch it at all, but some people had started to notice it. And then I saw one article come by that someone had written, and they were talking about new frameworks that were coming around. And I saw the headline and I was like, ooh, I wonder if maybe they would mention Redwood in this. The probability was going to be very low, but I was going to go look. And indeed, they did mention Hammer. Sorry, it was called Hammer at the time. They did mention Hammer, but they referred to it as Hammer.js. And I read that blog post and I was like, this isn't going to work. Because there is a very popular Hammer.js, like I mentioned before. And if this person was going to call it Hammer.js, then I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I could see it very clearly in my mind that when we launched this thing and I put it on Hacker News, the very first comment with 100 upvotes would be, there's already something called Hammer, right? And I just couldn't deal with that. I was like, I can't. This is going to suck so bad to rename this thing, but like, I have to rename it. We have to rename it. This isn't going to go well if we keep it called Hammer. And then number two also turns out shitty white supremacists have adopted certain Norse mythological symbology as like a white supremacy thing, of which Thor's hammer is one of those things. And I didn't want to be anywhere near that. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that. So that's bad. So we don't get to use Thor's hammer for stuff anymore. And so I was like, shit, we got to rename it. So then so you want to hear some of the other names that Redwood might have been called?
Yes.
There's some really bad ones.
Start with the bad ones.
So I was like, all right, I'm just going to make a big list of names I just was going to brainstorm. And then I went through and I eliminated all the ones where there was a popular NPM project that were already called that, of which here are some. Tenet. This was before the movie Tenet. This thing could have been called Tenet. Noodle, Farad, Ohm, Sculp, Amber, Quim with a Q. That would have been a bad name. But these are all projects that I think exist on NPM, wow. Which is why I eliminated them. Paradox, Valence, Apex, Azimuth, Wedge, Edge with 2 J's because it's like an edge framework. Plum, Weave, Shell, Skin, Mobius, Lepton, Flux, Patan, Dyson, Diatom because it has Tom in it and diatoms are cool. Perimeter, Cosmic, Plato, Sinew, Dax. Here's some that I think did not exist. Some of them did. Freya, I thought would be cool because that's also Freya's a character from Norse mythology. There already is a framework in F# called Freya. So if there hadn't have been, this thing very well could have been called Freya. Endor, Tenrek, Nudeln, which is the German word for noodles. It is probably my favorite German word. Nudeln, Frabjus, Fab, Voltic, Golak, Topo, Hamma, with just an A on the end. I was like, maybe I can still call it Hamma, because that's how it's pronounced in German, Hamma. Himbeer, which is raspberry in German. I don't know, I thought that was a cool word. It has beer in it. Godric, Tonks, a character from Harry Potter, because my son was listening to a lot of Harry Potter. I thought Tonks was a cool word. So those were eliminated. The three that were in the play other than Redwood were Vision, Diagon, like Diagon Alley, and Endora, which was a combination of my two cats' names, Endo and Dora, which is also the name of my Wi-Fi network for a long time, Endora. And then Redwood was amongst the finalists, and Redwood it became.
Redwood it is.
So then I started thinking, oh boy, now I got to get a bunch of trees. But then unbeknownst to me, I think, Tom, you went to like 99 Designs or something, right?
Yeah. So I was like, I'm just going to put this on 99 Designs because I don't know. I just wanted to see like a million choices.
Right. Which was fine. Yeah, because like once I get on a thing like a hammer, they all started looking kind of similar. But yeah, you go somewhere there and every single one is completely different. And it gives you a really big, wide choice.
Yeah, it's a really good bang for the buck. I mean, I think it costs $200 or $300 to get like a bunch of designs. And I probably had 200 designs or something more maybe on there that we went through. Some of them were really pretty good and some of them were just really, really bad. But it's amazing that platform works. Like the amount of effort that people spend to work these things up and then get like nothing for it at the end of the day. I mean, I feel kind of bad even putting something on there, knowing that like hundreds of people are going to put an hour or two into working up a logo and then literally get no benefit from it whatsoever. But it's a good way to just see a ton of options and then hopefully find one that works. And so the logo that you see now is one of those logos. And if you'll notice, there's a secret in the logo. Has anybody ever noticed the secret symbology in the logo? It's obviously a cone, like a pine cone. And it looks like a redwood cone. So a redwood cone is a weird kind of compressed pine cone. I think Rob might be trying to get one. They're very small. They're only like this big.
Oh, real one, yeah.
And so I gave that as an example, just like a picture of a real redwood cone as an example. And so you can see how it resembles the final logo. Like it has these weird little segments. It's a very different kind of a pine cone. And so that was what some artists used as their inspiration. But if you look closely in that logo, you will see in the white part 2 angle brackets. React.
For React. Wow.
Or code in general, HTML.
It's a good one. And now we've sent that little
like
there was a naming.
There they are.
Spend some time
there you go.
There you go. We did spend some time trying to name that little guy or gal, and Cotton was my favorite name. But okay, so 20 minutes left, and these are all wonderful stories because these are stories that don't get told, and I'm really grateful we've got this on recording as well, because we'll want to look back on this at a time too. But March 11th, 2020 was the launch day, and too many characters. I'll do this in 2 steps. So I posted the README as it existed that day, and we don't need to spend too much time there, but I thought it'd be interesting to just quickly go through. It's not letting me paste all this. Just what had changed as far as the stack, and here were the features that came out. It won't let me paste that, but there's the stack, and interesting, right? That's where we were, and that's where we are. Is there anything? I have a couple of questions I want to talk about on launch day as well, but is there anything that is missing from that we would have added that exists today?
I mean, that is the basic setup. It should probably say Prisma 2 because that's still. I mean, I don't know if we have changed that since then. Because there is a Prisma 1, which is a very different product.
We got to remove those coming soons. That's live right now? We got to take those coming soons off Justin's stream.
No, that's not live. This is from March. This is from March 11th, 2020, 1 year ago.
Yeah, we removed JSX because that's felt redundant. We chose Storybook because that was getting a lot better. I mean, it hasn't, like the fundamentals haven't really changed too much since that original launch. It's just like actually building it. There wasn't that much built at this point. It was literally just enough to do the tutorial, and that was it. And that was the gate. That was the gate for launch. For original launch was make the tutorial actually work.
That was make the tutorial work. So
nothing else needed to work. Everything else could be broken. The tutorial had to work.
All right, I posted some things. This is pretty fun. So the launch was with a tweet from Tom. And here was you can find the link to the tweet, but this was on our forums. I posted the link to the tweet. And so that was the announcement for it. And Peter, on that day, so this was fun. I'd never been quite through a process like this with open source and a community. And I set up a forum because we want to have a place if people are excited to talk about this and create a community around this project. This was an exciting day. I was a part of the team at this time. And Peter, on the day that we launched, maybe plus or minus a couple of days, you said to me, this is 1 year ago, David, we're going to look back 1 year from now at this project and this code base, and we won't even be able to recognize it. That was 1 year ago.
I said that.
You said that. Yeah. And I thought, I'm going to remember that. And 1 year later, we're going to talk about that because I think that's a really important foresight to have. So that was a big day. It was an exciting day. I'd never been included in a tweet that Paul Graham liked before. For me, that was like, I got noticed. Look at this guy. And we made it top 2 on Hacker News. We never made it all the way. And people were nice. Like, I don't care where we landed on the list. Like, people were actually excited about this. So it was a really memorable day and fun. But Peter, I'd love to hear. Well, you know what? We should. What else do you guys remember about that day? That's where we should spend a second here. Anything else memorable?
I remember advising all of you to not take too personally whatever the negative comments on Hacker News would be, and I was also quite surprised that it was so positive. That really was unexpected.
I'm sure I went through the tutorial for like the 40th time to make sure everything still worked. Because now people were actually going to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think similarly for me, it was just how nice everyone was. I was so scared that people were going to be like, "You're dumb, and this is the worst thing you've ever done."
You spent your time doing this?
What are you doing with your life? I thought my dad would phone me and be like, "What are you doing?"
You're bad, and you should feel bad.
Yeah, but it wasn't like that at all. We've actually almost never had anyone say horrible things about Redwood out in the open, or even to me privately. It's been a nice experience.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to there being a missing piece that Redwood is trying to solve for. And I don't think there's any JS or TS developers out there that are like, programming in JavaScript or TypeScript is like perfect. This is not a common thread that people have. It's always, all of this is way too complicated. All of this moves way too fast. All of this I have to build up over and over. There are not a lot of choices in frameworks to build web applications this way, even though tens of thousands of developers, probably more, are on a daily basis building web applications with a lot of these same components. And yet, where were the frameworks? I'm still surprised that there weren't a dozen competent frameworks. There was like Express, which basically did nothing. There was Next, which was very tied to Vercel and was well, still pretty basic at that point. And like, what else was there? They're just like, it was Create React App, and it's like, all right, you want to build a web application in the React ecosystem? Do Create React App, and then like, good luck. You're on your own. That was the state of the art.
Get started.
And Tommy, you'd always spoken about the adjacent possible, if I'm phrasing you correctly. But I always found that fascinating, where you were saying like, we'll create this thing, and then all of a sudden there'll be these other things that will like form around that. Like the idea is, when we did it, the idea was ready to be done, and therefore there were all these other ideas that also enabled it, or were very similar, that were coming up at the same time. Like it was the right time for Redwood to come out, and that's why it came out. Is that what the adjacent possible means?
Yeah, the adjacent possible is an idea from this book At least this is where I got it. This book called Where Good Ideas Come From by Stephen Johnson. I pasted in there. And that's it. It's like, why? So it starts with kind of a question. It's like, why did multiple people invent calculus simultaneously in the world when like people weren't really communicating? There was no easy way to communicate. What are the chances that two people almost simultaneously would invent calculus at the same time? Or what are the chances that evolution as a theory would be discovered, formulated essentially by two different people at the same time? Like the chances seem impossible. Like these world-changing ideas, how would it come that two people would do this simultaneously? It seems so unlikely. And so this book is an explanation, and really the crux of that is the idea of the adjacent possible, which is that these ideas are discovered simultaneously because all of the necessary building blocks for those ideas have been discovered and formulated. And so the adjacent possible are the things right next to them where these 5 ideas need to bump into each other, and then you can discover this new thing. And because all those building blocks are in place, someone is going to discover that next adjacent piece. And oftentimes multiple people discover it at the same time because all of the necessary building blocks are just sitting there. And so that's why multiple people discover things simultaneously. So this was true of GitHub. When GitHub came out, almost at exactly the same time were another one called, it's not even around anymore. I mean, Bitbucket was there within a few months. Very similar idea, using a different version control system. They started with Mercurial. And then there was a third one that I think has since disappeared. I can't remember what it was anymore. But so that's the same. I mean, Redwood's the same too. Redwood and Blitz both announced their first versions publicly within a month or two.
Yeah,
right, within weeks. So you see this constantly over and over and over. And so the lesson to me is if you come up with these ideas, they're probably inevitable. And like, do you want to be a player or not? Because someone will be, right? Like if Redwood wasn't around, Blitz would be the only player in this game right now. And and since like Remix Run is a potential player, Bison is a potential player, you see these ideas come out because all the pieces are there, and the frustrations of the community where it's like, what are we doing? Like we have all these amazing pieces, but like nobody's ever integrated them before. And then so a couple of people all at once are like, we should integrate some things. And that happens within a few months of each other. The ideas finally coalesce, and then boom, like 2 frameworks come out almost simultaneously, both of which were building for some amount of time before that.
Yeah. Well,
Redwood ends up being, I think, a lot more complex because we've built a lot more ourselves than Blitz. So Blitz's timeline, I think, has been a bit faster because they have built on Next, which gave them a large advantage from a starting infrastructure point. But like you see it all the time, and go read that book. It's really worth a read to just think about ideas and if you want to build stuff yourself and come up with these ideas, like how do you do that?
And so thinking about this last year, and we probably have about 10 minutes left here, thinking about this last year, and Peter, to my question earlier of, do you recognize the code base? Did we see the adjacent possible continue to happen? Or how would you think about highlights or discoveries we made but also now there's this wonderful community, right? There's hundreds of people participating in Redwood, right? How has that played out over the last year? What are some highlights of that? Some ways you've seen it happen? Has it happened?
I think one of the things that actually surprises me every now and again is the architecture that we have in Redwood enables so many things that we want to do now that I actually didn't even know that we wanted to do. It was almost as if like somehow it's being built in a way that just makes so many things possible that we want to reach in the future. And that really surprised me. I was like, whoa, okay, this is just going to work for all these exciting things. We don't have to start from scratch, and like there's not a massive refactoring that needs to be done. And that's one of the things that I'm really happy about it. I think the core or the founding team has really dug deep and architected something that's super solid from the ground.
Yeah,
And we
looking at the
changed
chat
a
here. No, go ahead. Sorry, Peter.
Oh, and I was saying, and we changed a lot of the code to TypeScript.
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah.
Well,
That's
that was
one
one
of
of the
the
big.
things.
Not recognizable. Oh yeah, if it's in TypeScript, you have no idea what that is.
There were two big complaints, I think, with the initial version or the early versions. One was, does this support TypeScript? That was constant, ever present. Because none of us were TypeScript developers, right? We've all essentially, I mean, the four of us, we've all learned TypeScript to varying degrees, mostly Peter, to accomplish this. And we have some amazing core team members now that are really good at TypeScript. So that's been super helpful. We had to learn that, but that was a big complaint. And the other one was, how do I do server-side SSR? How do I do server-side rendering or some equivalent? And so that's now we have a solution for that, pre-rendering, but that was like a big one. And that's only the beginning of a solution to that, but we're trying to think through that problem more from the beginning. Those were two of the big things. I was going to say before, Meteor, David, you were involved with the Meteor ecosystem.
Yep.
And you feel like Meteor was probably the closest thing to Redwood before Redwood.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And they had to we could talk about Meteor for a while, but yeah, I think if there's a comparison to make today, like Meteor really was the one that blazed a path for what a full stack JavaScript framework could look like. Pre-GraphQL, they ended up adapting that. They actually wrote their own rendering template. It was Blaze, which was really nice, but React wasn't a thing. So they had to solve a lot of problems, which created a lot of lock-in. And I think they were just a little bit too early, but they were wonderful. So, man, this last year,
go
ahead.
When Tom was talking about the adjacent possible, right, with like these rooms connected to rooms, and Meteor tried to like jump too many rooms, right, without going through the
I think
ones.
I think that they were early, and it's still a great framework, but it was a rocket ship when it first started. But yeah, anyway, and they had to make some, right? You have to make some predictions at that moment in time if you start really early about where things are going to go, and it was just hard to make those kinds of predictions, I think. So for me, one of the highlights this last year where I was like, oh wow, this is happening, was actually was it a month ago? It was in the middle of a meetup, and I was on the community forums trying to find a link, and someone had posted on our community forums, hey, we are a funded startup and we're building on Redwood. So we have funding, we're building, and we're looking to hire our first developer. What better place to go to than the Redwood community to look for someone to be our first hire? And I just went, it's happening. Right. So the framework is out there. People are taking the framework. They're building a thing. It's becoming a thing. They're hiring people from the community to be a part of the thing. And I just went, it changed. Like this changes something. And that had kind of been happening in the background, but I have no idea who those people were. I've never met them. I hadn't seen them in the forums before. It was like it just happened out of nowhere. And that blew my mind.
Well, it makes you wonder how many people are out there experimenting with Redwood and just never engage with us at all.
Right.
I mean, so an aspect of that, so we have the free sticker thing on the website where people can request stickers. And we've sent out 30,000 stickers now, probably. Like there are thousands of people that come by every month now and request stickers. So many that we've had to rephrase and say, some of you will get stickers. and there's a huge population in India, like 50 or 60% of the requests are from people with addresses in India, which I find really fascinating because we don't necessarily see those engaging. And I don't know why that is. I'm still trying to figure out that phenomenon, but like, it just shows me that there's pockets, there's communities out there that are, I think, a lot bigger than we imagine, that we don't even know. And I think once we hit 1.0, it's going to be a really powerful milestone that people will say like, okay, I've been waiting for it to calm down because I don't like going through the really tumultuous upgrade path, of which, of course, we break stuff every release that we do almost, which is exactly what you're supposed to do.
But we're so kind about it.
I mean, the write-up, the upgrade notes are amazing.
Like we make it as painless. We make the pain as painless as possible, but yes.
The amount of work that you put into those, David, and I know others as well, like it's remarkable. And I think I think this is exactly what a framework has to show that they can do, though. Like, if you can't have good release upgrade notes, then it's game over. Like, people will abandon you because they know that you're not going to take care of them when it comes time to do.
Right. You don't build a startup if you're worried about what the next release is going to do. Right.
Right.
Like, you're not going to bank the VC's money on a framework that you can't trust.
Yeah, so. And starting that even in the pre 1.0 phase, it's good practice. It's good, like, figure those things out, iron out those details before they actually matter for, the vast bulk of people who will ever use the framework.
So what didn't work this last year? That maybe a better way of saying that is, what are some things we thought would happen, anchoring in the vision of Redwood, deploy to the edge, integrated workflow, like, so the DX vision that we had, the end user experience that we had, the infrastructure vision that we had, what were some of the pain points? What didn't work or didn't happen like we thought it would this last year?
I think the main weaknesses are still on deploy. I think Lambdas have not evolved as quickly as I anticipated that they would. I expected especially the file size limits to be less restrictive than they are today. I thought that would progress more quickly, which is a difficult thing for Redwood to try to stuff your entire API into a single Lambda. Is you will reach bottlenecks at some point. And we've done a lot of work to minimize how much is getting deployed to the API side, but that's still a limitation you'll see. And just the performance characteristics of getting your Lambdas talking to a database. You just have to be very careful about that. There's just not a pre-made solution that really solves all those problems for you, and you need connection pooling if you're going to use Lambdas. So there's still, it's deploy time stuff that for me is where things have not, I was expecting Redwood to evolve like this and for Lamb to evolve like this and for them to kind of get to the same point when we wanted to do a 1.0, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're still going to be behind on the serverless infrastructure element of it. Netlify does a really good job and gets us a lot of it, but you still need to get your databases in the right spots and hook up your own connection pooling. And Amazon's connection pooling thing is not good. And so this stuff is way harder than it should be and will be, but I don't know exactly how long that's going to take. It's my prediction was not entirely correct. I thought it would happen a little bit faster. It will happen eventually. I just don't know how long that's going to take. And so I've started saying that we should probably talk about Jamstack less often and talk about just the integration and the DX and really focus more on making a super smooth deploy to containerized systems, to AWS in general, which is what the people that are running real startups right now, many of them are doing strategies that are not serverless because of the characteristics that are a little challenging in serverless. So yeah, I think that's something that I am a little disappointed about, because this whole endeavor was kind of to amplify what Netlify could do. And I think there's still a ways to go there. And I'm very much invested literally in Netlify and want to make that happen, but it's still, it takes time to get these things to work. And there's a lot of different stakeholders and players that have to make things happen all at the same time. I'm hoping that with a 1.0 and more people building sites in this Jamstack way, that the different vendors will see that and they'll be like, oh, we need better solutions for that. We need better integration between serverless and database. We need less restrictiveness on Lambda execution, et cetera, that we can help drive that evolution. Maybe that's the missing piece. We need to get to 1.0 before people really start paying attention from a vendor perspective.
And we can pull. Peter, before your battery runs out, did you have any thoughts on expectations from the last year that didn't get met? We might have lost him. There you are.
I'm still here. I'm just super dark and creepy. Yeah, I think the performance characteristics of Lambdas really has exactly as Thomas said. They didn't match my expectations, and I'm looking forward for that to happen, because I think the mental model of serverless functions is just really appropriate. Yeah. Other than that, I I always assumed that TypeScript was this. No, I'm not gonna say what I want to say. Anyway,
I know where you were going. I know what you were going to say.
Do it. Do it.
oh no,
No, we
No,
don't have
serious.
time. We don't have time. I'm a TypeScript consumer.
you know,
Don't go there.
I
Go
mean,
there. Come on, it'll be fun.
the pandemic, I never ever assumed that I'd be writing code in the way that I am now in like this weird world that I'm living in. But having a community like Redwood has given me a lot of that, a lot of living in the world kind of experience that I miss. So I didn't know that a community could be this much fun. One of my expectations. Yeah.
It has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The next question, and Rob, chime in on those things if you want.
You're muted.
Oh wait.
Sorry,
Muted.
I was having a total heartfelt moment with myself.
Oh, that is good.
I was I was
the
attempting to say, sorry, can I just
go ahead.
one
Yeah,
thing
please.
related to what Peter was saying. I was saying it's been really nice for me during COVID times to be building this community and making new friends. And I feel like I feel like I'm more awesome and complete and just a better person for like having these new friends, the core team members that I've come to know really well, and everyone else in the community that comes together to work on this. It's just when you care about something and you get together with other people that care about it and you're willing to put time in, like that's to me the truest sense of community in this way. And like you can get so much more out of it even than you put in because of the sort of the amplifying effects. And so for anyone here, that includes you, like be as involved as you want to be. And the more involved you are and have time to be, the more rewarding it can become as you just get to know other people. And it becomes not just a thing that you're building together, but also a community of people that you care about regardless of the work that's being done. And it's just really cool to know people, you know, in London and Sweden that are working on this that I'll probably know for the rest of my life and that are just really cool people.
Hear, hear. So where do we go from here? So as we look forward, what are the things? And I don't want to talk a 1-year horizon. I want to talk. Let's go 5. 5 might be hard. 3 to 5. Like where are we?
5 is impossible.
Where are we?
Right?
Yeah, 5 is hard. Where are we?
Although
in
I did
3
have
years?
a tweet. I did have a tweet that predicted 5 years, I believe, that's referenced in the README.
I had it in there. Yeah, I had it in the chat over there. Put back in.
So where are we in 3? Yeah, that was kind of more infrastructure at large. But where is Redwood in 3 years? Or what are some of the defining, like, if Redwood is out in the world, like, give me an instance of what that looks like or feels like. And I'll go first. I think let me see if I can model this. Like, I think in 3 years, we're going to have a real, like, examples of companies that have built on Redwood, and there will be this kind of relationship legacy of people that have been a part of the community. We'll really be able to track that, right? People that came, maybe a sole developer, got started in the Redwood community, was a contributor, made friends, and then a thing, like a group of people got together and that project started and took off. And I think it's going to be, right, multi-client, multi-tenant. They're going to be working from one repository on all their different apps and all their different sides. And in 3 years, that distance between the infrastructure and the code is going to be a lot more aligned. They're not going to be thinking about serverless database anymore, or I want to do subscriptions, or where do I like upload files and put those. Those things will be just natural and a part of the code base. But it's going to start. It's going to start with relationships, and we're going to bring the infrastructure closer. And you're just going to get to add more things into your repo, right? There's just going to be more things you can do inside there. You can work on mobile, you can work on your Electron app, right? Like this concept of sides is going to come to a nice fruition. Who knows what the render layer will be like? Those things don't matter. It's the clients, it's the end user points that'll matter. All right, somebody go.
Yeah, I think to pick up on the sides one of the really nice things about the architecture of Redwood is that the current web side is one of what will, we hope, be many officially endorsed sides, including a side for mobile, a side for command line. Those are probably the two big ones. But even potentially sides with different rendering technology, like you're suggesting. Like, do we want to have a Vue side instead of a React side for those people that love writing Vue? There's nothing about Redwood that makes it need to use React. It's just that React was the most popular and what we knew the best and what we were building with. And so we chose that to be the first one. But because we use GraphQL as the abstraction of communication between the front end and the back end, that means that you can create clients of whatever type you want and never have to rebuild another backend, which is one of the biggest things that I wanted to solve with Redwood, because I've done that several times now. Started with Rails, built it in the normal way, decided we wanted a mobile app, and then developed a separate GraphQL API that fed the mobile app. And now you've got two backends.
Because what's better than one backend? Two backends.
What I really don't want? I don't want two backends, because one backend is already almost impossible to maintain. Two backends is at least doubly hard, and probably more, because now you've got multiple things talking to other multiple things in the backend. And managing complexity is everything when it comes to building a company and maintaining velocity. And so Redwood is really trying to do a lot of that for you and leveraging. So much more of that in the future, much more on the services side, figuring out what does it mean to be a service? When your site gets bigger, how do you organize those services, and how do you keep that separate, those concepts of separation really productive and helpful? And how do you deal with your front end, your front side, your web side as that gets bigger? Because there's already some concerns about that. I know that Chris Burns and Everfund have a different website layout that they've experimented with that is working better for them. And so we need to think more about how do Redwood apps evolve as they grow larger and really stay up to date with that. So those are things. But I really look forward to having one solution that's like, all right, I need to build I'm starting a new company. I need to choose a technology. Of course, I'm going to choose Redwood because instantly I got all my favorite tools. Plus, I got a website that I can spin up really fast and all kinds of help that it's going to do for me from a maintainability perspective and productivity with cells and things like that. Plus, I'm going to need a mobile app too. So I'm going to just choose what Redwood has. So maybe React Native. And I'm going to spin that up. And now I have my solution for that. And that has all the same levels of easiness. And as a developer tool, so I'm going to have a command line. And like, boom, now I've got my command line app. It just talks GraphQL. It's got integrated authentication. Like all that stuff is just done for me. And why would I not choose Redwood? Because it gives me the best of front end and back end, and gives me a leg up when it comes to these different clients that I want. It doesn't paint me into any boxes around where I deploy to or what my, using GraphQL as that transport, which adds additional initial complexity, but is surmounted very quickly by the drawbacks of it are reduced when you start building a more complex app and realizing that level of separation between front end and back end allows you to have multiple clients and also just keep track of where things should execute in your mind and in all your developers' minds. And then things like Storybook, being able to develop your components in isolation, like just the whole thing comes together and becomes this really beautiful path to creating a new startup. Like that's just what I want Redwood to be, and the community around Redwood to be like. And if I use Redwood and join the Redwood community, all of these people are going to help me build my thing.
World's best open source community, hands down. 3 years, for sure. And we're going to, in scaling the community is going to be a fun challenge, right? How big can the core team get? I hope it can get massive, because that's, if you want to be a part of Redwood, the core team needs to be able to scale so that you could, if you want to become a part, right? Those will be the fun challenges, but that's going to enable all this, right? World's best open source community, boom. Amazing. And we already have the foundation for that. Oh yeah. All right.
Can we give
1 minute?
We're right at the time here. Can I give a sneak preview of something?
Whoa.
Something that I'm sure everyone has been waiting for. What is this?
What is that? Ooh. What?
And wait, not only that. What is this?
Oh yeah.
Ooh,
yeah. That looks nice, Rob.
That's the same shirt that I wear.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Tom, you want to talk about the texture and the?
So this T-shirt is the next level. Next level is the brand of this T-shirt, and this is the Tri-Blend T-shirt, and it is literally the only T-shirt that I own. I own about 20 of them, and so it had to be on this shirt because otherwise I wouldn't wear it.
So what's coming? Rob? How could I get a shirt like that?
Wait. Let me say.
Whoa.
Yeah. So these are going to be in these will be men's and women's sizes because unisex shirts are the worst and they're basically men's. So we have both. These are going to be on the store. We got a store coming up in 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 weeks. So pretty soon. And there's one. Actually, I can give you one more sneak preview.
Oh, I want it. Oh,
so shiny. Little lapel pins. Yeah.
Is that real
so we should have
metal?
shirts and this pin. It is. It even has like the stabby thing on the back. Look at this.
Gotta have a stabby thing.
Nice. Everybody needs a stabby thing.
And of course, every order will include some stickers too.
We have lots of stickers.
So coming soon.
We have a lot of stickers. Yep. That's going to be exciting. Rob, thank you for making that happen.
So prediction for 3 years from now will be that all of so Olivier was asking if we have a revenue model. Swag, hello.
Yes, and this will have this. Someone asked if it's going to have worldwide shipping. We will ship anywhere. Coming soon.
It's going to be great. Oh, that was a perfect ending. Rob, I didn't know. I didn't know that was coming. That was perfect.
I was trying to sneak.
Hey, gentlemen,
Tom and a side
it's really been fun. Tom, I can't thank you enough for kicking this party off.
Well, thank you for being here. This party would not be a party if I was just alone in a room.
It's really been fun. You all are friends. I didn't know you could become given a year, and to everyone else that we get to hang out with weekly and not just virtually, but in real-time meetups. Thank you for being friends and for jumping on this crazy train. It's really been fun.
Fun ride.
All right. Yay, nostalgia. Happy birthday, Redwood.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks for sticking around.
Happy birthday.
Bonus time. Go get some swag. All right, ending the event now. And button. Boop.